Coming up on Chasing the Natties, some of the bigger names in the spring portal have begun to find their new homes, and we are going to break down their impact on CFF this year, both in terms of their new value and the players that are already at their destinations. In addition, we've got another round of spring games to run through with a heavy emphasis on some Midwest and West Coast teams, and we'll be discussing if there's anything that we can take away from them. We've got all that and more coming right after this.
To go, breaks the tackle, he's 10, he's touchdown! Cook's gonna throw the deep ball, and Burton past the defense! Touchdown, Luther Burton!
Milrow gonna run it again, got a lane, kicked in the turbo, Milrow! Goodbye, touchdown Bama!
This is Chasing the Natty, a college fantasy football podcast. All right, welcome in everyone. This is Jared Palmgren, host of the Chasing the Natty podcast. I hope you guys are having a wonderful ride to your work on this Monday morning. We are the College Fantasy Football Podcast on the Campus of Canton Podcast Network. You can find us on all of your podcast feeds and on YouTube every Monday morning during the off season at 6 a.m. sharp. If you want to support the great work we are doing here, head on over to campusofcanton.com and subscribe there with one of our scrumdiddlyumptious tiers. We have content ranging to all sorts of college football games, whether it is CFF, Devi, C2C, College IDP, College DFS, anything out there. If you play it, we've got content, tools, rankings, everything you need to succeed. If you want to get in touch for whatever reason, you can find me in the show on Twitter. I'm at CFF_Jared. The show is at Chasing the Natty, and the handsome fellow across from me is Mr. Chris K. He is at Chris K on Twitter. Chris, how you doing today, man? You seemed taken aback by my choice of words for our Campus Canton tiers.
I don't look at show sheets, so I did not see scrumdiddlyumptious on my bingo board for today. So that was very authentic right there, that response from you, and very professional. You finished it out very strong. You brought it back in, but I'm good. I got the big thing I'm thinking about right now is I have 1 week left of paternity leave, and then I'm going back to work. I haven't worked in 3 months, so I'll be going back to work next week, and I don't know what to do with my hands. It's like, what do I actually do anymore? But I'm good. I can't complain. How about you?
I'm doing good. I mean, you've been doing good work with your hands. You've been putting out some CFF content for us over at Campus of Canton. I know, was it you that put out the stack article recently?
Yeah, QB stacks. Pumped that out a couple days ago, and then I have some best ball thoughts I'm going to run through. I did a late quarterback draft strategy, which I think I kind of like forced myself into, but so I didn't execute it like I think you should. And so like the conversation in that article will be more based around like, if you're going to do a late quarterback strategy, like here's what you should think about. So that'll be a fun one to do. But yeah, a couple random things here and there for sure in this offseason.
Honestly, it'd be a pretty cool like series of articles to kind of talk about like if you're going to hit running back late, what kind of players should you be looking for, right? If you're going to hit wide receiver late, what kind of guys should be hitting? It doesn't have to be names per se. I mean, names obviously help, right? But at the same time, just kind of knowing what kind of players are there in later rounds and what could provide you some value. I think you could take it pretty far with that, with every position.
Austin and I were kind of DMing on the side the past week or two about like, is there enough content out there for like a best ball podcast? It would be like maybe just like a off-season podcast where you kind of like your dynasty podcast, like once or twice a month, maybe discuss things like that. And I think that's where we could really dig into, like, it would be like, all right, if you're going to do a late quarterback strategy, how would you do it? If you're going to kind of wait on a running back, right? Or like whatever, right? Optimal theories and stuff. I think there's some interesting stuff out there. And to me, like best ball is like really taking over in the NFL for offseason stuff. And like best ball is like the draft, right?
Yeah.
Like everybody does it. I think next week, or I guess like starting today of this podcast, Underdog is like starting their NFL best ball championship where like the winner gets like 1.5 million, right?
Wow.
So like, yeah, it's crazy but it's a hugely popular strategy and format. So it would be interesting to run something like that, but time constraints or what is cautioned me about jumping into something like that. But it would be a fun idea, just generally speaking.
I'll be real, again, with me and Nate doing the Dynasty podcast, like once a month is perfect. Like, again, obviously with CTM, we try to crank out content weekly here because, again, this is really the show that we keep up with the news for the most part. We're not really like we're about to, now the spring's kind of settling down, like we're going to kind of get into a bit more strategy here in the next month. We'll be a lot more free to kind of vary the topics here and there. But the last like month or so, right, has been mostly news. It's been spring camps, spring games, things like that. But like with Dynasty, or when it comes to like strategy and stuff like that, like once a month is perfect. It does not take a ton of time out of your schedule to do. So I think that'd be really fun.
In the Dynasty podcast, like if you think about it, your Dynasty podcast with Nate, so much of the weekly CTN stuff is very relevant to it, right? Like we talked about weeks ago, we talked about Jason Patterson, right? Like that conversation was had a lot of value for a Dynasty standpoint. So you're right. Like I've listened obviously to all the different Dynasty episodes you've done. And, like you guys have both done a good job of like talking about things that haven't been discussed on what like you and I would talk about in Chasing the Natty, or like the Fantasy Points All Access. Like that stuff is not being broached so far just because of the series and the off season, things like that. But it's been a good addition, and the more the merrier. I go on a lot of walks, so I need as many podcasts as possible. So if anybody wants to start more, go for it. I'm in for it.
Honestly, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of people out there who are a lot smarter about this stuff than they give themselves credit for. So I highly encourage anybody out there, if you are somebody who plays a ton of CFF, like start putting your thoughts out there a little bit more. I would say, like, again, great example, Justin Leo, VP Volume Pigs. Like, he just started writing articles one day, and now, like, I would say he's probably the strongest article writer in the CFF space. No offense to UK, like,
none taken. I mean, he pumps out a lot of content. It's a lot of content, right? Which is very cool. Like, it's just interesting to hear about like who anybody is even thinking is worth talking about, right? So when Justin puts out his content, it's like, oh, okay, like maybe I should pay attention to this, right? And then you start to formulate your own opinions and thoughts. Yes, he nailed it. He's right. That makes a lot of sense. Or like, you know what? Like I can see it, but I don't agree with it, but I'll keep it in the back of my mind, right? Like any good fantasy player should always be open to more information, and then just kind of figure it out from there, and kind of, use what you've done in the past to kind of figure out yay or nay. But yeah, Justin does great stuff for sure.
Oh, that's enough patting everybody's back in terms of the great CFF content that is out there. Let's actually talk about some of this content that we'll be hitting on this week, Kay. As I kind of mentioned on top of the show, we're going to run through some of these spring portal players. A lot of them have started finding their locations, their new teams, and we'll talk about whether or not they're going to be relevant this year. Maybe there are guys that we hold on to for next year potentially, or there are guys that maybe kill some value for guys that are already in the rooms that they are entering. So we'll kind of get right into that. And then we also got some spring game reactions. Again, got some Oregon, got some Nebraska, Arizona State, Washington State, got a little bit of Mountain West there. So we'll get right all into that. But first, a couple of quick announcements. One, as we kind of talked about already, go check out the latest episode of Defending the Natty. We discuss some of the 2024 freshmen. Don't get around to some of the guys that have kind of flashed in some of these spring games. But for the most part, it's a pretty good dive into just kind of a very overall view of the freshman class. We got instant impact, stashes, fades. A great, golly, I think Nate and I went about 2 hours on that podcast. So it's a pretty in-depth dive. I think we ended up discussing like 36 different players in that pod. So very, very good content over there. And next month, we're going to be hitting on some supplemental players. So a lot of guys that are, kind of fringe guys that we take in CFF best balls for the most part, but, it'll be fun to kind of dive into some of those guys a little bit deeper. And then the other announcement that I have is a Campus of Canton announcement. We have our 2024 Devy Guide coming out on May 1st for any of you that play NFL Dynasty, Devy Leagues, Campus of Canton Leagues. If you want a go-to place to understand the value of players in respect to how they're developing for the NFL, that is the go-to place. Like I said, available May 1st, $20 standard, but you can get it for free for those of you who have our yearly NIL tier. It'll come as part of the package. And then if you have our yearly, I think it's scholarship tier, you are allowed to get one free guide per year. along with your membership there. And so you could use it on this guide. I highly recommend you save it for the CFF guide. No bias there whatsoever. But regardless, our Devi team does a ton of work, and you absolutely should go check out the 2024 Devi Guide at Campus of Canton. Again, available May 1st. That's enough spiel there, Kay. Let's get into some of these players, some of these spring portal players here. Again, overall, Kay, I know, or no, the portal had not opened up last time that you were on this show. So Austin and I kind of talked about how the portal, for the most part, has been relatively quiet, and even a week later now, it's still relatively pretty quiet again. There are obviously some talking heads out there that are kind of playing up that it was going to be just absolute mad chaos, and for the most part, yeah, there's some big names here and there for the most part, but I'd say it was kind of what I expected, like compared to like last year and stuff like that. Do you kind of feel the same way?
Yeah, it's been underwhelming. I think you guys did a good job of speaking to it on the episode a few weeks back, so I won't reiterate that. But it has been underwhelming. I think there's a lot of things that go into play here. There are some interesting names for sure, which have been fun to like discuss. But it feels like you have a couple superstar types, and then pretty much like role players, right? Like guys that'll help feed the offense, but like I don't know, like just won't run with the number one, or like won't run with like a legitimate value right from day one. So I think the list of guys that we'll talk about today are fairly interesting. You have to kind of pick and choose, but it's been underwhelming overall.
Yeah, I think, again, I won't reiterate too much, but I still kind of go back to what I said last week, where I think people underestimated how good a lot of teams would be at retaining their players that they really want to have, right? Like it's programs like Utah State and like UMass who really kind of got hit hard here in terms of like holding on, like not being able to pony up the NIL to hold on to guys like Utah State. We're not going to talk about it, but they lose both Davin Booth and Rahul Faison. I'm pretty sure I just butchered that, but they lose their top two running backs from last year, basically. And basically every beat reporter for Utah State basically said, like, yeah, guys, we couldn't match the NIL offers that other schools were offering these guys. But for the most part, other schools have been able to retain their guys, and there's been other reasons why guys entered the portal. Again, we're recording this the 28th. Technically, players have until May 1st to enter, and I do have a sneaking suspicion we'll probably get one or two bigger names potentially that enter in, because, again, a lot of guys are giving their new schools right up until the end of the deadline to pony up some NIL money or pony up some like a better offer for this next year, whether it's playing time and stuff like that. So probably one or two big names, because you don't have to have a destination by the 1st. You just have to enter the portal by the 1st. So we'll see if that changes in next week. I'm sure we'll talk about it next week. But for right now, let's go talk about these players that are now finding their landing spots here, Kay. We got really a ton of running backs. I would say that's probably the biggest that's the biggest position that has not benefited, but been involved with the spring portal this time around. We got Damian Martinez, the former running back out of Oregon State. He has now landed at Miami officially. Penny Boone, technically still in the portal, but all indications are that he will end up with the Kentucky Wildcats. You got Dallin Hayden, the former Ohio State running back, headed to Colorado, along with Rashad Amos, who was headed to Mississippi State last week. He has now flipped his commitment and is headed to Colorado as well. And then the other name I have on the board here, Dylan Edwards, the former running back out of Colorado, who Amos and Hayden are now replacing. He is officially headed to Kansas State about, as of 20 minutes before we started recording this podcast, Kay, I think. So like we
great timing. It's great timing. Great
timing, Mr. Edwards. I wish every player would do what you just did. So, Kay, we'll start at the top with Martinez. He's going to Miami, Florida. I personally am back and forth on whether I think this is better for him or worse for him than Oregon State. Because on one hand, I think he is now at a more stable program than Oregon State. Oregon State obviously in flux, couldn't find a conference. They were going down to the Mountain West. They lost their head coach, right? They hired from within, which is always good, but the pieces that were left behind were not exactly great. They lose their future quarterback in Aiden Childs. They lose Silas Bolden, their best wide receiver. Really, like, Martinez was all they had left in terms of like big impact players from last year. So there was always kind of the fear of like, okay, what if Oregon State's just bad and Martinez just doesn't get as many scoring opportunities as he did last year? But now he goes to Miami. And Miami, their running back room has some solid pieces, right? But there's a lot of question marks there. Mark Fletcher coming back from injury. You would think that he should be good to go by the fall. They do lose, obviously, Javonte Citizen. They lose Henry Parrish. They lost Donald Chaney earlier this year, but guys like Chris Johnson, the true freshman coming in this year, and then Elijah Lofton, a guy they're converting from tight end to running back. They have some other options there. So I think the side that makes me a little hesitant here is that they have enough pieces to go slightly more committee than Oregon State would have with Damian Martinez. But also at the same time, it's pretty clear like why they went out of their way to get Martinez. So where do you kind of fall? Because personally, he's dropped probably about maybe 5 to 7 spots for me since this transfer, but also like I'm not sure if I'm being entirely fair with that.
Where do you have him then? If you dropped him 5 to 7,
I got him at 22. I got him
RB 22. Okay.
I got him right behind LaQuint Allen.
Wow. Okay. I moved him up. I moved him from 11 to 10 over Jaden Ott after this. I haven't really touched it a whole lot in the last month, so take that for what it is. But I consider him a legitimate. This is a great spot for him to me, right? So his options. Think about it this way: before 20 minutes ago, when Dylan Edwards committed to Kansas State, we loved DJ Giddens, right? Great running back, dynamic, great in the passing game, clearly a great runner. And everybody has him top 6 or 7 running backs.
True.
What is the difference between him and Damian Martinez at Miami, right? His competition is true freshman Chris Johnson, Elijah Lofton. You have Mark Fletcher's his biggest competition, but I don't, this is one of the things, Nate talks about soft tissue injuries and how many times have we been burned? Didn't he tear his ACL?
If I remember correctly, I think that is what happened.
I think it was. And how many times have we been burned by torn ACLs, right? Jordan Tyson, Cam Rising, Brian Keithy, all these different players, they end up just sitting out longer than you would expect, right? 16, 18 months instead of 8 to 12 months. I love this for Martinez. This is a team that, hey, at the very least, we go from Oregon State, where he probably is guaranteed 20 touches at least, right? But it's a bad offense compared, now to a Miami team that is very good offensively. Cam Ward is very serviceable. It's a very good period with good receivers, right? This is a very good offense that's going to score. So I consider this stock up. I absolutely love this destination. LSU would have been the same thing. Tennessee would have been great as well. But I think Miami here is anticlimactic, but it's awesome. This is great choice. If you would have gone to Texas, it would have been oh God. Now we have this domino effect of value changes. Miami, awesome. Love it. Wheels up.
I can agree with you there that him going to Miami is probably had the least splash effect on the rest of CFF, because you're right. If he had gone to Texas, it would have been all right, what do we do with Baxter now? What do we do with Martinez? Who do we actually think is going to lead the backfield? Things like that. But I agree with you. He'll be the lead back at Miami. The difference between Miami and Kansas State, though, I will say, is the history with Mario Cristobal versus the history with the Kansas State staff. Because how many running backs has Miami had that hit over 700 yards in the last 3 seasons, Kay?
Probably 0 if you're bringing it up, but how many are named Damian Martinez?
That's the point I was going to bring up next. It's this is where
right?
This is where I'm kind of going back and forth with it a little bit. Again, saying it out loud, 22, probably knocking it down too far. And I'm looking at it, I don't need to rank him behind CJ Baxter, right? There's more questions behind CJ Baxter being the lead back at Texas than there are Damian Martinez going to be leading this backfield for Miami. I think putting him right back where I had him at 15, I think makes the most sense. Because again, that puts him in the same tier to me as Malik Sherrod, Mekhi Hughes. That's kind of the end of that truly top tier of running backs, and I think it's the perfect place to put him right there. And your point about Mark Fletcher, again, we talked about I kind of mentioned it last week with Austin, right? I think this provides Miami the opportunity to really slow play Mark Fletcher coming back, right? If you don't have a guy like Martinez, you might be forced to bring Fletcher back earlier than he needs to. But with Martinez, now you got a guy that you can rely on who's done it before. that kind of takes away the potential impact that Fletcher might have on Martinez's carries going into the season. So I agree with you.
Real quick, do you think that head coaches that are potentially on hot seats, do you think they hammer their stars? Like, do you think they'll say, you know what, like, throw caution to the wind, I'm going to give my best players the ball nonstop?
On paper, it seems like it would be a decent hypothesis. I would love to actually like go back and like look at the history.
It's a little harder to diagnose that, but he's gone. Mario Cristobal's gone 5-7 and 7-6. This is a weak ACC that's about to get blown up in 3 or 5 years.
In a year where the 12 teams can make the playoff.
In a year that 12 teams can make the playoffs. He could make the ACC championship game and lose and still make the playoff. Like, that's very conceivable. To me, it's like, man, Mark Fletcher's not going to be ready. You're not going to you're not going to use Chris Johnson. Like, you'll like enough to take away value. I don't want to hammer this. I love this because I think Martinez is such a good player that Cristobal will be forced to use him as much, and they want to win. It's all about bringing back Miami. So I'm in, as I've already said, but I think 15, I have him at 10, 15 is definitely fair because I love Makai Hughes. I love Kyle Monangai. I love Sherrod. These are all guys that are like really interesting and very valuable in their own right. So like, it's just more kind of like quarterbacks we've talked about. It's like kind of preference. Like maybe you take a little bit more risk and upside, maybe take a little bit more value or maybe like safety and floor with Hughes and Sherrod. So.
All right, let's move on to another guy here. Let's look at Penny Boone, the former running back out of Louisville, former running back before that out of Toledo. Before that, he was at Maryland, so he's been all over. It seems like now his landing destination will be Kentucky. Apparently, his agent put out a message saying like his final 2 options were Kentucky or Georgia, to which the entire CFB world said, okay, so it's Kentucky then, because he's not a Georgia level running back. Let me tell you that right now. I reached out to several people, and all of them were very confused by where that was coming from. So again, he's probably going to land at Kentucky. Do you like that, Kay? Again, we've already talked about like just the situation in Kentucky with their running backs doesn't seem to be as good recently. Do you think Boone comes in there and is like a Damien Martinez situation where they're bringing him in to be the guy? Or do you think like, Chip Trayanum, Patterson, they're talented enough to where we're just not getting a top level Kentucky running back this year?
I think this kind of blows up the Kentucky running back room if he goes there. Like, I think that I probably won't want Chip anywhere unless I start to hear something differently. I think the chances of Penny Boone just not being very good for like P4 is decent. But like considering what you have to pay to get Chip, like I probably would just avoid the situation altogether. This is like if Martinez went to Texas, like I think it just blows up the room, and great for Kentucky and their offense because now you have like Penny Boone's huge, right? Chip is big enough. Mm-hmm. Jason Patterson we've talked about is a good third running back option at the very least, right? Like I think that's great for them offensively, but I hate this for fantasy if he goes there.
No, I agree with you 100%. I've already like started putting it together in my rankings of like, all right, how far do I move down? Poor Chip Trayanum, and let me tell you, he takes quite a hit in my rank. Where did I have him? I can't find him now all of a sudden. He goes down to RB 67 for me. Like you said, it just completely blows up the room for me. Because if Penny Boone's going there, that means they don't trust Trayanum enough, right?
You would think. I don't know. Like I had him in like the late 20s, and there's a lot of random names past 35. So it becomes very weird, this weird gray area of like what to do with some of these guys. I don't hate knocking him to the 60s. Initial reaction was not, oh, that's a bad move. It's just like, I don't know where I would put him. I'm moving him down. He's definitely in the 30s at the like mid to late 30s at the very best, but it could be way worse for me.
Who would you have ranked higher, Boone or Trayanum?
I would definitely Trayanum. I would have Chip over him. Yeah, at the very least, he's had the full spring semester.
That's a good call.
And we talked about it weeks ago. Chip was good at Arizona State. He was good at Ohio State. Like when they said, "Hey, you know what? Like stop practicing as a linebacker. Go play running back." He was good. I remember. I believe he was good against Michigan. with his limited touches, right? Like, so I think he is a good running back. It just will torpedo both their fantasy outputs. Not that we were both drafting Boone anyways.
No, I was pretty out on Boone for the most part. I do have Boone ranked ahead of Chip currently just by a little bit. I got him at 58. Again, Chip at 67. Mostly because, again, like, to me, running back is one of those positions where you can plug in a lot of guys. And so if they're going out of their way to get a guy like Boone, who is one of the most sought after guys, and we know for a fact commands a high NIL price, that to me tells me that they're probably going to have him be the lead back, at least of a committee, if not the guy that they kind of rely on. So, but I also don't trust Boone as a talent, so I'm kind of stuck in the middle here.
Do you think he got that much money? Like, I know that like Louisville apparently was like going to throw him a ton of money, but like this late in the game, like,
well, again,
he command a whole lot?
I mean, the counterpoint to that, right, is like the fact that he was looking at Georgia and Kentucky, which are two schools that, you know, they have their NIL programs. Like, don't get me wrong, but they're not really programs that throw like the TM bag at guys, right? So maybe you're probably right on that a little bit. So
it's a weird conversation, that whole Louisville gang, which we've kind of talked about in Slack. But yeah.
All right, let's go look at the Colorado guys. Got Dallin Hayden, Rashad Amos, both of them headed to Boulder because Colorado literally has nobody at the running back position. Their two freshmen that they're bringing in are both injured. So this past weekend in their spring game, they had to play a cornerback at running back just to have somebody at the position. Because again, Dylan Edwards, we'll talk about in a second, he is gone. What do you think about this? Okay, Dallin Hayden, talented guy. Rashad Amos, I would say a power 4 level running back. He just absolutely demolished the MAC last year. I mean,
I don't like this one bit.
I would say, like, I'm trying to be positive here, man, but like we've seen this before, right? Alton McCaskill went to Colorado last year, just never heard from again. He's transferring out now. Dylan Edwards, like, yeah, he had a couple flashes early, but like throughout the season, they just didn't run the ball a whole ton. He was too small of a guy to really do it anyway. I don't know.
This is not a good. This is bad. This is a bad situation. We just killed two potentially fantasy relevant players. If gun to my head, give me Hayden because at least he's coming from Ohio State. Amos was what was he? South Carolina to Miami to. I'm not about. I'd rather take my chances on the guy coming from Ohio State, but ultimately, are they going to run it that much? Like, I know I've heard some differing opinions. I personally think Shador throws it 40 times a game. So if he throws it 40 times a game, how much are they running it?
Mm-hmm.
And so this is probably a moot point because I don't think unless they got some crazy superstar, I don't think they really run it a ton.
Yep.
But I liked Amos decently at Mississippi State. He was definitely draftable. Now I kind of think both these guys are like 29th, 30th round best case type players.
I'd probably be okay with Dallin Hayden in like the last 5. I agree with you that of the two, if I have to take a shot on one of them, he's the guy that I would go with because I was very impressed with him when he did kind of get his limited run as a true freshman at Ohio State. Now I have no clue why he didn't get enough run after that point, but even still, like, I think if there is a guy that is what Colorado's looking for at the running back position, he is probably it. In terms of how much is Colorado going to run the ball versus how much are they going to throw the ball, I think it's one of those things where I don't know if Shador gets to 40 times a game. I think he probably gets to 30, 35 times a game, and they run it just enough to keep Shador from being like, a CFF superstar. Like, I'm not shy about it. I do have Shador ranked way lower than probably a good chunk of the industry. Because I think they are going to run it more this year, but I also don't know if they're going to run it enough or if the game script is going to warrant us drafting a running back out of Colorado this year. So we'll see. It's going to be like right in that, like, it's going to be right in that terrible area for CFF, I think, where it's like they can't go full air raid with it, but they can't run it enough either.
If they were smart, they would just throw. I'm sorry, they'd throw the shit out of it. To be like completely blunt, right? Like, who are their best weapons? It's these receivers. We'll talk about it, I think, with the spring game. It's like, These are the guys that you want to target. Throw it to your best players. Nate has talked about it. Like, hey, like Dion wants to get his kid drafted, and then it's like we don't know what's going to happen with Dion after that. It would make so much sense to pass it a ton. So,
Oh yeah.
I don't think Hayden and Amos are proven enough to warrant drafting much higher than late, but at one point they were considered valuable, so we'll see.
I mean, Dion's built his team like I build my Madden teams, right? Get a good quarterback, get good receivers, get a good enough running back to run it whenever the defenses decide to throw 8 people in the backfield. So maybe. Last name we'll kind of touch on here. I actually spent a little bit longer on this than I thought we would, but that's totally fine. Dylan Edwards going from Colorado to Kansas State. I think this might be the best landing spot of all the 3 guys here. Not for this year, but for future value. Like, Dylan Edwards is Deuce Vaughn, but slightly bigger and honestly probably a better talent overall. And he's going to the system that absolutely made Deuce Vaughn an absolute star. Now, again, DJ Giddens is going to be their number 1 back this year. I really think they're bringing in Edwards as a guy to be the backup for this year. But if DJ Giddens is gone after this year, they got their next man up right here. He fits the system super well. Do you kind of feel the same way, Kay?
I love it. This makes sense. Like, does Dylan Edwards as a college fantasy football player have like value? Only really in a situation like this, like where he lands at like a Kansas State or he goes to a G5. Like, this is the best fit for him. I think this certainly should knock down Giddens potentially, right? Like, it just depends on how close you had Brooks and Harvey and those types around Giddens and Maffa. The Giddens is great, but like part of the reason why people had him top 5 or top 6, 7 was because he was like the only guy. Well, he's not the only guy anymore. Like, in Kansas State played Giddens when what's his name? We just literally said it and I forget it.
Trayshawn Ward?
No, well, yeah, Ward, but the little guy, the little itty bitty guy, Deuce Vaughn, when he was there. So like, what's to say that there's not some sort of level of minor committee that would take his usage away from like some insane numbers to like very good, but still like, there. So
I mean, Deuce Vaughn was like an elite CFF running back,
right?
Even with Giddens getting mixed in there.
Yeah, I don't think Giddens is like Vaughn. I don't think Giddens is like a Deuce Vaughn though in terms of assets for college fantasy. The point really is just that like I think that Kansas State's cool with playing a tiny little itty bitty guy, and Edwards is good. Was he 4-star? I think like
he was.
He's shown to be and have some good games. Like, Kansas State would be crazy not to give him like 8 to 10 touches, run and pass game. So I think the argument of Giddens being a top option because there's no one else is now a little bit shakier.
I agree with you if that is the reason why you have.
If that's why you had him, right.
If you had him that high, you have to bump him down slightly. But again, he had a really good finish to the year last year when he had Trayshawn Ward there. Now, Trayshawn Ward, obviously a different skill set than Dylan Edwards, so it's not going to be a complete one-to-one comparison there. But he finished the year right here with 29 fantasy points, 25.1, 6, not great that week, but 20.4, 17.6, 17.4. That was all with Ward there being a 1A, 1B back with Giddens at times. And so, like, I think he'll still be fine for the most part. I'm not moving him personally. I think this is more of like, if you're in a CFF Dynasty League or if you're in a keeper league and you held on to Dylan Edwards, I think got lucky as hell here, because if he had stayed at Colorado, it would have been a complete waste of a pick. Now you might have had one of the best picks from last year because of what his future value now holds.
Well, you weren't getting rid of him. Once you had him, you weren't getting rid of him. But yes, I definitely agree. There's times where you have a guy and he transfers somewhere stupid like Amos going to Colorado, like toast, right? What a great Miami, Ohio player to Colorado. And then you get lucky, right? You get Tanner Mordecai going to SMU. You get no value to also very decent to good option, right? So it happens. This is just the day and age of Dynasty at this point, really.
Fair enough. All right, let's move on to the second round of transfer portal players. These guys are all, I would say, more on the minor side of things. I don't really expect a ton of them to have a ton of CFF value this year. I'll definitely want your opinion on one of these guys here, Kay. But we'll start with Kayron Adams, the running back out of UMass. He is now headed to Michigan State. I think he'll be the backup. I think his value is kaput for this year. Henry Parrish, former running back out of Miami, Florida, formerly of Ole Miss. Before that, now headed back to Ole Miss. Ole Miss adding 2 running backs out of the portal, which, again, shouldn't surprise anybody, I don't think. McKay Hillstead, the former true freshman quarterback there at Utah State, he is now headed over to BYU, in which I think there is somewhat of a quarterback competition that maybe he could take advantage of, but not going to be a super believer in that. Justice Ross-Simmons, the former wide receiver out of Colorado State, we expect him to be the wide receiver 2 there this year. He is transferring. Many thought he would end up at Florida, but no, he is going back home to New York in Syracuse. So that is his landing spot. And the last one we'll touch on here, Keandre Lambert-Smith, probably the top wide receiver in the portal, formerly of Penn State, now headed to Auburn. So, Kay, you are the resident Auburn fan in our CFF team. God rest your soul. What do you think about Keandre Lambert-Smith going from Penn State to Auburn? We've kind of touched on with Cam Coleman in the past. Like, Cam Coleman could be the wide receiver 1 this year just because of how weak their wide receiver room is. Do you think that changes now with Keandre Lambert-Smith going to the Plains?
I mean, I think he's by default probably the receiver 1, Lambert-Smith. But I don't think he does enough to like warrant value in like an actual best ball draft or redraft or anything for 2024. I don't, like Auburn's going to run it a bunch, and, Peyton Thorne at times will throw it 15, 18 times a game. And when that happens, you just can't really have like a guy like Lambert-Smith, who is, to me, nothing special. Like at least Cam Coleman is like kind of freaky athlete, like true freshman. Like you get some potential upside because you don't necessarily have anything like to really base it all off of, and except for incredible film and stuff like that. But like, I don't like Lambert-Smith. I wouldn't draft him. I have talked about Cam Coleman as like a guy that I would pick over. I would pick until this. I would have picked Cam Coleman over Jeremiah Smith from Ohio State. Now I'm like, man, there's probably 2 or 3 mouths to feed that are decent enough in a passing game that's not going to have a whole lot. I don't know. I don't think that any of that receiver room is all that interesting anymore.
Yeah, that's what was going to be my next question, because like I knew you had said that you'd be willing to take Cam Coleman last 5 rounds, and if that had changed, it sounds like resident Auburn fan here saying don't draft the Auburn receivers. Probably
it would have to be. It would have to be the very last round. It would have to be, like you have a great receiver room and you just want to take a wild shot, right? Like I have the idea of like you should grab all these different receivers, put them in a bucket, these late round guys, and you kind of just here and there pick one in these different drafts that you play. Mm-hmm. You can't take Cam Coleman in every single draft. That's just dumb. Like the possibility of him being actually an asset in best ball is not all that high. But if you pick him once or twice out of 10 leagues or 20 leagues, like then it makes sense. Then you just kind of randomize and pick these different random guys to kind of fill out the final spots. Then it makes sense.
No, I agree with you 100%. That is, again, we talked about a best ball strategy show not too long ago. I think that'd be one of the first things you might want to talk about is like those last like 10 rounds, right? You don't need to draft like the same guy every single one, because like unless you're like super in on a guy. But for the most part, like if these guys were more surefire bets, they'd be going higher in drafts, right? If Keandre Lambert-Smith or Cam Coleman, if we knew all right, that's going to be the wide receiver 1, or we knew that somebody at Auburn is going to be like a CFF relevant wide receiver, these guys would be going in like the 18th, 19th round. They wouldn't be going in like the 25th round. So kind of rotating your guys out in the last 5 rounds. No, I think that's honestly a really good point if people want to hear some strategy talk.
We talked about Cam Coleman, maybe even Lambert-Smith here. Do you consider Justice Ross-Simmons in that same boat of like still a dart throw?
I don't think Justice Ross-Simmons starts. He's off the board for me.
Me too.
From everything I heard from Syracuse after that spring game, they're pretty set on who their starting wide receivers are, which are Hatcher and Haynes on the outside, and then you have Pena in the slot and Gadsden in the tight end role. Maybe lining in line. We'll see. Roton. We'll see if he lines up in line or if he just is going to get another slot position out wide there. But Justice Ross-Simmons, this said to me a lot more about him just kind of going home. And, well, it's in New York. There's not really a ton of options in terms of where he could go. Again, his other option was Florida, which I was kind of surprised he didn't go there because they seem like they have a bit of a need at receiver for the most part. But I don't think Ross-Simmons is coming into Syracuse, taking over one of those starting spots. He was a guy that we were mostly only interested in because, again, he seemed like the next guy up at Colorado State, and we knew that was an offense that could pass enough to have two top-end wide receivers if they needed to. And yeah, Ross-Simmons was like fourth in receiving yards last year for the team, but he was hurt a good chunk of the season. So like he probably would have ended up a top 30 wide receiver if he played the entire year last year. But that's only at Colorado State. I don't think he's going to be much of a value, at least this year, at Syracuse.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not interested at all in this. And I don't think we know enough to consider a Syracuse receiver a valuable asset, right? Like I think maybe you could throw a dart at one of them, but like if he's not even going to be one of the starters, then I certainly am way off of it. His values, if you had him, like we talked about a minute ago, like if you had him in Dynasty, his value just went from, oh, this is pretty cool, this is a good option, to, oh, this is not really all that interesting of an option anymore. So,
and it could go back up, right? Like after this year, we could see Hatcher go off to the NFL draft. Ross-Simmons is the starter opposite of Haynes, and maybe we find out this year that Syracuse can support two outside wide receivers for CFF relevance, or at least in a best ball setting, maybe they're guys you want to take shots on. We have no clue about that yet. And it doesn't make any sense for you to go and draft Ross-Simmons knowing that we don't know if he's going to be a starter or not this year, over guys like Haynes and Pena and Hatcher, guys we know will be starters this year. Doesn't make any sense.
Right.
One last guy I want to touch on here. Okay, this is less on the guy and more on the running back room. Henry Parrish headed from Miami to Ole Miss. We saw Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt go to Ole Miss last week. Is there anybody in this Ole Miss room that you're interested in, or do you think they go full committee?
I think the Vegas odds would say this is definitely a committee, but I think the offense is good enough where you should consider throwing something at Parrish, or I don't like Bentley personally, but at the right price, I think the very end of a draft, you would be crazy not to throw a dart at one in the 29th, 30th round. Like, this offense is going to be so good. All it takes is one injury. All it takes is Parrish to just pop in the first week, and they just say, hey, you know what? Like, we'll give you 15 carries and 2 to 3 catches, right? Like, and they just score so much that all of a sudden he's now a valuable asset. This is one of those offense plays where they're just so good offensively that it makes sense. But I certainly wouldn't invest a lot of draft capital in any of these because there are a bunch of random guys in the room that could pop. You just don't know which one.
Yeah, I'm pretty much off of this Ole Miss running back room unless we get to the fall and it starts sounding like a guy like Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt or Henry Parrish like becomes that dude that they're relying on. For now, the only interaction I'm having with the Ole Miss running back room is just praying to God that scenario you just laid out of like Bentley popping week 1 and them kind of riding him the rest of the way makes up for the amount of Bentley shares that I picked up at the end of drafts. That's the bedtime story I'm going to tell myself at night moving forward.
I took Merritt in a recent draft where I drafted like 4 running backs in the first 5 rounds. It was this late quarterback draft that I did. And I took Merritt at the very end because they obviously liked him enough to grab him.
True.
He was a good running back at New Mexico. If I have 4 solidified running backs in the top 5 rounds, like, when is anybody that I draft in the final rounds going to be it? Only a guy that had potential upside, like a running back that's RB1 in Ole Miss. 5% chance, 3% chance, but in a scenario like that, I think that makes complete sense.
I agree. Alrighty, that's enough of the spring portal talk. Again, we'll get a couple more guys potentially trickle in by the time that the deadline of May 1st comes in. Some of the guys that are still out there that haven't found their destination yet we'll potentially discuss, because again, like a guy like Mike Wright, right, transferring out of Mississippi State, if he goes back to like Auburn or something like that, then we're not going to care. But if he goes to like, I don't know, Buffalo, like all of a sudden he becomes CFF relevant again, but we're not going to know until we see the landing spot. So we'll touch on that again next week. We'll hop over to some of these spring games now, okay? And I think We'll go ahead and start with the Big Ten teams here. We got 3 of them we'll discuss here today. All the SEC games pretty much out of the way already. We'll start with Oregon. Again, a Big Ten team. Still weird to say on some of these, but that's realignment for you. We got to see a good amount of all of the quarterbacks here at Oregon, and a lot of the beat writers were discussing about how Oregon has probably the deepest quarterback room in the country, and quite frankly, I can't disagree. Gabriel looked great. Dante Moore looked great. Austin Novosad. If you picked up Austin Novosad in like a CFF Dynasty League last year and you're still holding on to him, I don't think he'll ever start for Oregon. It really does seem like Moore will be the heir apparent now. He's going to start somewhere else, and he's going to be good. So it's really good to see what Oregon has in that running back or in that quarterback room here. Gabriel, 14 for 21, 163 yards, 2 touchdowns. He had himself a nice day. Dante Moore, 11 for 16, 87 yards, no touchdowns through the air, but he did have a 75-yard rushing score to end the game. So anybody who was kind of afraid that, when he gets in there, he's not going to be able to run like Bo Nix or run like Dylan Gabriel would be able to, I don't know. Seems like he was a little bit willing to run here. The other takeaway I had here is just the weapons are astronomical for Oregon. Obviously, Tej Johnson, clearly the best at this moment, as I will say, at this moment, because clearly Evan Stewart just got there. But Evan Stewart, despite only being around for the latter part of spring practice, already working for the ones, got 3 catches, 67 yards, and what should have been a touchdown on an additional pass there. So he looked really, really good. And then just the other options they got. Again, Trayshawn Holden, Gary Bryant, great wide receiver 3 and 4 right there. Jurion Dickey kind of rotating in as well. And then they got other young guys like Jeremiah McClellan, Justice Lowe. Like, it's almost a little concerning kind of moving forward in the future of like, all right, which guys are you willing to invest in for the future? Because like Tej Johnson, Evan Stewart, they're both gone after this year. I think Holden's out of eligibility after this year. I can't remember off the top of my head.
He's got to be at this point.
I would say he's been around for a while. And then the other thing is the running back situation. Jordan James, 124 total yards on the ground. That's pretty incredible for a running back in a spring game, considering they don't typically get a ton of work. But I think Noah Whittington was out for this game. But Jay Harris, one of their other younger running backs, had himself a pretty nice day. 52 yards on the ground, 34 through the air. So another guy that is going to get rotated in. That's my concern, though, a little bit. Like, how much is Oregon going to rotate? Because Jordan James, I still think is their best guy, and I think he has the best chance of being Bucky Irving from last year. But Whittington coming back is going to be concerned. Jay Harris looking good. They're also talking about potentially adding Andrew Paul from Georgia. Does this running back room get a little too messy at one point, or are you still kind of in on Jordan James?
I'm in on Jordan James. I just don't have any because of where I just like different guys so much that I will take them in the 3rd and 4th round, and James just never tends to be in my path, right? My biggest takeaway and thought from this is, and I did this maybe a couple weeks ago, Austin, I think it was on Campus Life, was talking about the chances that Tej Johnson outproduces Evan Stewart for CFF, and he was talking about it being a non-zero, obviously, and I have Tej Johnson ranked over Evan Stewart. And the reason being is obviously he's not the brother of Dylan Gabriel, which is unfortunate. But he's been there. We know what we're getting out of Tej Johnson.
Yep.
We know, the schedule is the schedule, right? If you don't like Tej Johnson for the schedule, then you don't like Evan Stewart for the schedule, right? I think the schedule is a little concerning. They do play some Midwest games in the cold. But like Tej Johnson's the easy stuff. He's great after the catch. And these defenses aren't good enough to keep up with his speed and agility and the routes that he'll run and the schemes and stuff like that. So, like, to me, it feels like if you take Evan Stewart over Tej Johnson, you're taking a lot of risk with a new guy that has not consistently done anything in his career to do something that we know Tej Johnson's going to do. And Tej Johnson looked great. Evan Stewart looked good, obviously. And I think in the notes, too, you said, like, he was just kind of easing into it. Completely makes sense. And that's not any shade at Evan Stewart that he only had a couple catches for like 60 yards. But it just feels like we're taking unnecessary risk with Evan Stewart compared to, instead of just taking Tej Johnson.
Oh, I've touched on this before as well. I have Evan Stewart ranked ahead of Tej Johnson, but you know where I have them ranked? I have Stewart
Back
at
to back.
7 and Johnson at 8. The only reason why I have Stewart slightly ahead is this right here. This, where do I put it? There we go. Again, Troy Franklin, wide receiver 3 last year. Tej Johnson, wide receiver 26. We've seen in the past with Will Stein, those outside wide receivers do technically tend to be the home runner hitters. They're the ones that will kind of get more of the touchdown opportunities, even if the slot guys get some volume there. And that can lead to what that disparity you have between Troy Franklin and Tej Johnson last year. So on some level, like, I understand people kind of waiting a little bit on Tej Johnson because, like you said, it's like, oh, if we know what we're getting, then we know we're getting the wide receiver 26, wide receiver 25, which is, there's tons of value in that. Don't get me wrong. But with Evan Stewart, I understand why people might be a little bit more likely to go for him because, again, you're getting the possibility of another Troy Franklin, especially with a dude as talented as Evan Stewart. Now, I agree with you. Wide receiver 4 in the first round, I've kind of touched on this before. I don't like Evan Stewart's value there. I don't understand why people want to take Tej Johnson almost a full round after, or even sometimes even a full round and a half after Evan Stewart. It just doesn't make much sense to me because, like I said, as much as I can tout the system, as much as I can tout as the top outside wide receivers being the guys the last couple of years, maybe that changes this year. There's I'd say a good 40% chance, like 30-40% chance that Tej Johnson is the leader in receptions for Oregon this year.
Yeah, and Tej Johnson's 2023 was weird. He came on so strong towards the last half with like catches and yards, but then he early on in 2023, he had games with a couple touchdowns.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at his first 5 weeks, he had 3, 7, 6, 4, and 2 targets compared to Troy Franklin's 9, 9, 7, 10, 7. So like, to me, that is where the disparity between Troy Franklin as receiver 3 and Tej Johnson in the mid-20s is. The question, that can't possibly happen again. Tej Johnson, brand new, came from Troy. Was there maybe like a G5 type of quick adjustment? Both of them are ultimately going to be very good receivers. It's probably just nitpicky. But, considering that, and you are in agreement with like the value of where they're being picked, it makes sense.
I agree with you on that.
I got Tej Johnson in like mid-third round once, and I was like, this is a
no run higher.
Yeah, so like, but it is interesting. And, I wonder, maybe the biggest question is like, do we see an ADP shift on something like this, right? Like a spring game where he does have a big day compared to Stewart. So,
alrighty. Any other things you want to touch on with Oregon, or are you ready to move on?
Let's move on.
Let's move on to the plains of Nebraska, slowly but surely heading back east here. Yeah, we got to talk about the one guy that everybody wants to talk about when they talk about Nebraska at this point, and that is Dylan Raiola, who looked great on this day. 16 for 22, 239 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Harbaugh also finished the day with 2 touchdowns, but in my opinion, kind of watching the game, clearly more inconsistent. I would be absolutely blown away if Raiola is not the starter for Nebraska by the time the fall rolls around. Again, given everything I know about the Raiola situation in general, he pretty much everything's been lined up for him to be the starter coming out there. I'm still of the opinion that Dylan Raiola is not going to be much of a CFF asset moving forward. Like any of the years he starts from Nebraska, whether it's true freshman year or his third year there, he's going to follow the same route that Quinn Ewers did. I might be a broken record here. I think I've talked about this. Definitely talked about this on the Dynasty podcast. But if you didn't listen to that, you might be wondering, like, oh, if he's starting this year, is he a asset? I'm gonna say no. I'm really not going to be drafting much, if at all, of Dylan Raiola. His skill set just doesn't lend itself a ton to a CFF quarterback unless they're going to start throwing it 30, 40 times a game. And given the depth they have at running back here, I think they're probably okay with him kind of lining up in that 20, 25 passes per game. He did score a 64-yard passing touchdown in this game, which looked really, really pretty. Like, clearly, like, the talent flashed there, but it was also like the fastest dude on the team, birding the Nebraska defense, which we know is subpar compared to other Big Ten defenses. It was basically a perfect storm for that touchdown. So I don't know if we're going to see a lot of that coming into the fall. What about you, Kay? Are you in on Dylan Raiola as a CFF asset?
No, he's got to be just purely like a Debbie C2C type, right? Like, I think one nice thing for C2C is that it does seem like he's gonna get a ton of reps from day one, right? Like, which is great. You want to get a guy that's going to have a ton of starts under his belt. The Big Ten is a legitimate conference, so that's all positives. But like you said, like I just don't. Will the volume be there to make him a valuable quarterback in CFF? I don't think so. Has Matt Rule ever done anything like that? And isn't Satterfield the guy that everybody typically hates from C2C as their OC?
Typically.
Yeah. So like, I don't see it. They'd have to have some volume there in the passing game. The nice thing is the schedule is pretty soft. The Colorado, Northern Iowa, Illinois, at Purdue, UTEP to start the year. I skipped that one. Rutgers, at Indiana. Like those are their first 7 games or so. Like that is a soft first 7 games. Then it gets a little bit more difficult, but I don't see a path where he's all that. This is a great quarterback year. I don't see how there's a path for him to be top 30 to 35 at all. So I'm completely out on him, obviously, in like redrafts. I'd be more interested in like C2C where I can get like the NFL value out of it, because I do think there's obviously some value in the fact that like he's going to probably start for 3 straight years. And in this day and age, what are the chances that he ends at Nebraska?
That's a very, very true point. I would not be surprised if he's gone after 2 years. But again, like no matter where he goes, right? Like I just don't really see like
Well, if he were to go to like LSU, right? Isn't he just Garrett Nussmeier? Like if he's
fair enough.
if he plays and gets some experience and shows to have some talent, like we've seen Nussmeier, I think you could rank him similarly to Nussmeier. But then again, he still has to get to LSU, those types, to make him valuable. That just shows you where we all think about him as in terms of CFF.
Okay, yeah, I can buy that for sure.
I think the bigger question is receivers.
I was going to ask you about the running backs and receivers next. So, are there anybody here that you're interested in?
This is one of those ones where I need to watch a game or two, like in the beginning of the season, and just be ready to pounce on whoever I think has the most talent, and like maybe might get the most target share. Currently, no, I can't see myself drafting anybody in this running back room or receiver room, but like I could see myself saying, hey, a couple weeks in, this receiver seems to be getting some good targets. Rayola's good. Maybe he continues to see a high target share, but I can't see myself yet. Not, maybe down the road, right? Like a Dylan Raiola at Nebraska in year 3. Like this, to me, this is more of an investment of guys that I think will be at Nebraska next year and the year after than it would be who's going to produce the most right now.
Well, and I think the other interesting thing, the kind of takeaway I had here when it came to receivers at least, was that the guys we would kind of expect to be like the starters here, right? Like Jamal Banks, Isaiah Nayor, Malachi Coleman. Well, Coleman was injured, so he didn't play, but like Nayor had like a few splashes to start, but like nothing, no real like highlight worthy plays. Jamal Banks played, but wasn't targeted like at all. Like he ran with the ones, but like wasn't targeted at all on the day. And the splash plays came from younger guys like Jalen Lloyd and Ja'Cory Barney. Like Ja'Cory Barney caught a 41-yard touchdown from Harburg. Lloyd, we talked about earlier, caught the 64-yard touchdown from Raiola. Like, who's to say that, like, yeah, we start the year with Banks, Nayor, and Coleman, but, like, it could be possible that one of those guys kind of works their way up into the starting lineup. I think there's just too many questions for us at this point to really target a wide receiver. What about running back? To me, it looks like a bit of a mess because Dante Dowdle looked really nice in this game. Again, 2 rushing touchdowns, 7 carries, 76 yards, also 4 catches for 11 yards. So a guy that, like, if they needed to be an all-around back, could be it. But Ramir Johnson, yes, he's somehow still around, and Gabe Irwin were both out of this game. So are you seeing committee here, or are you seeing, like, is Dowdle talented enough in your mind to potentially be worth throwing a last 2-round pick at?
I think the betting favorite is committee again here, right? But I've seen Ramir Johnson. I've seen Gabe Irvin, right? Like, I'm not impressed by these guys. And Gabe Irvin got hurt to end last season. Well, for most of the season, he was hurt. But, like, I would be more inclined to throw something at Dante Dowdle, but the offense just doesn't scream, like, proven enough to think that, like, an offense is going to score enough. And, if you're going to take a dart throw like on Ole Miss running backs, like at least Ole Miss is going to score 35 plus. Nebraska, they might score 27 points a game.
Sure.
Like they have a weird, tough schedule at the end of the year with like Iowa, Wisconsin. I don't want any part of a true freshman quarterback going at Iowa in the championship weekend of playoffs, right? So Dowdle would be the guy that I would target, but it would have to be super late, and that's about it.
Yeah, I'm trying to look. I was trying to look at our
I,
ADP. Let's see if I
I
can
can't
find
imagine
him real quick.
I can't imagine he's being picked at all.
He actually is running back 112 and 340. Can't do the math off the top of my head, but I think that's like 28th round.
So he's right there at that
Right
type
there at
of
the
area
end.
that I would take. I think that's a fair spot.
Yeah. And I imagine he's like going undrafted most drafts, and there's probably like a draft or two in there where somebody picked him higher, kind of bumping up that ADP a little bit there. All right. We got to keep it moving here. Otherwise, we're going to be here for 3 hours. So let's go ahead and talk about. I'm pretty sure when I put this team on the show sheet, I heard an audible sigh from several miles away from Kay. We're going to talk about Rutgers and the incredible CFF potential that comes with this. No, again, like Kyle Monangai, we know like he's probably the guy to own here. But I do think it is kind of interesting to talk about Kirk Soraka coming here to Rutgers, right? He is a guy that we have seen produce tons of fantasy wide receivers in the past. And so there kind of becomes two things here. One, who's the wide receiver? And then two, does he have a talented enough quarterback? Well, start with the quarterbacks here. Apparently, there's a legit battle going on between Ethan Kaliak-Mandis, the transfer quarterback from Minnesota, who has worked with Kirk Soraka before, and Gavin Wimsatt, the starter from last year. Kaliak-Mandis, 10 for 17, 147 yards, and 2 touchdowns in this game. Wimsatt, a little bit less on the passing, 8 for 16, 76 yards, and a touchdown, but 5 carries, 65 yards, and 2 touchdowns on the ground. So he had himself a really nice day on the ground there. Okay, before we kind of break into the receiver history with Kirk Soraka, do you think it's even worth talking about? Because do you like either one of these quarterback options?
You said that we would be talking about Rutgers today. That's a false statement. You are talking about Rutgers today. I'm not talking about Rutgers today. Uh, these quarterbacks are so bad. I can't possibly invest anything in any of these guys. And I think you're about to come with some history that makes sense. And I appreciate your insight and background on this, but I won't and can't do it. The schedule is really juicy, and I love that for Kyle Monangai. That's why I have him as a top 15 running back. You can't make me do this. There was an episode of I think it was Debbie Debate or the one with Corey and
Mike?
whoever the Mike. Yeah, I was gonna say Michael, but Mike, where they talk about like I think maybe Colin hopped on and guest spoke or something, and it was like they did like, well, you can't get any worse at quarterback than Gavin Wimsatt, and then like they went to the next one and was like, yep, and Kaliak-Mandis is here, and it doesn't get worse than Kaliak-Mandis, and like that's just kind of where that quarterback room is, and I just am having no part of it in the passing game, none.
Yeah, again, I fully am aware of the quarterback situation here, and it's why like this is a dream that I'll talk about here. But it is something I think people shouldn't be surprised if there does become a fantasy relevant wide receiver here, right? Because look at Kirk Soraka's history. Jahan Dotson, 2020. 52 catches, 884 yards, 8 touchdowns in just 9 games. That's on pace for a little over 1,100 yards and 11 touchdowns in 12 games. The year before that in Minnesota, he had 2 wide receivers. Tyler Johnson, who had 74 catches, 1,100 yards, and 11 touchdowns. And Rashad Bateman, 57 catches, 1,100 yards, and 11 touchdowns in that season. The year before that, 2018, Tyler Johnson, 74 catches, 1,100 yards, and 10. It's actually kind of crazy how similar these stat lines are. And then you go back to his time in the MAC. And like obviously these numbers are just video game numbers. And that's what happens when you have great talent and a great offensive coordinator calling in the MAC. But Corey Davis, 2016, 91 catches, 1,400 yards, 18 touchdowns. Corey Davis in 2015, 82 catches, 1,253 yards, 11 touchdowns. Daniel Baverman, 103 catches, 1,266 yards, and 12 touchdowns in the regular season. Then Corey Davis in 2014, 70, 1,212 yards. He has produced wide receivers pretty much everywhere he has gone, except for this last stint at Minnesota, which was hampered by Kaliakmanis, which is part of the reason why they couldn't do what they want to do. But Daniel Jackson still was wide receiver 41 last year for CFF. So he still had a 100 target guy, even with Kaliakmanis at wide receiver, at quarterback, So much excuse me's going on in that last sentence.
So I will entertain you. I'll entertain you with this because facts are facts. Data is data. He has a familiarity with Kaliakmanis, the Greek rifle. But it's really strictly because of the schedule. Can you tell me what... I will tell you who I think is the hardest game for Rutgers on the schedule, and that'll tell you how ridiculously easy the schedule is. You want to take any guesses before I tell you?
No, I remember us talking about this before when we were talking about Kalmanungai's potential in this upcoming year. Because I know they avoid Ohio State, they avoid Penn State, they avoid Michigan, right?
They avoid Oregon.
They avoid Oregon. Hardest one left, I guess. Do they face Iowa at any point?
They avoid Iowa.
They avoid Iowa. Minnesota?
They play Minnesota at home. I think, and there's some bias in this, their hardest game will be a non-conference game at Virginia Tech. And I think that's completely fair considering all the depth. But that just shows you how bad their hardest games are: Wisconsin at home, Minnesota at home, and at Virginia Tech. If you want to maybe jumble that around and pick the order based on that, fine. But like that is an extremely soft hardest 3 games.
So what you're telling me is that there is room.
You're telling me there's a chance.
You're telling me there's a chance here. So then who's the guy, right? The leading returning receiver is Christian Dremel. That's probably the guy, like, I might take a shot on him because, again, he performed for Rutgers last year. Although Nassim Brantley stood out in the spring game, 4 catches, 73 yards, and touchdown, had good repertoire with both of the quarterbacks here. So I think he could be a guy maybe, but, like, I don't know.
I think this one you can safely just stash away, like hit the little star button and just kind of like watch and put them on like your little watch list and watch their first game and say who is on the field the most, who is getting the most targets, who's getting looked at the most, and then add them immediately. I don't think anyone is going to be paying attention week 1 to Rutgers. They do play Howard. Very difficult HBC.
I mean, that's gonna be at the top of my viewing experience on week 1. I don't know about UK. It's a quiet weekend this upcoming year.
No, so yeah, I'm willing to entertain it, but it's strictly from add them to the watch list, see how everything shakes out week 1, and go from there.
I will take you entertaining my ramblings, so we'll go with that. All right, let's go talk about some Big 12 teams. So naturally, that means we're going to talk about Arizona State, that gummit realignment. So obviously, Jan Rashada leaving kind of leaves them with a clear number 1 quarterback here. I think that is Sam Leavitt. Again, some people are talking about like, oh, maybe they go Trenton Bourguet. No, we got the word from Kenny Dillingham saying that if they started today, Sam Leavitt would be the quarterback they would throw out there. And he looked pretty dang good in this spring game. Nothing that will blow you away or anything like that, but definitely significantly better than Bourguet, who looked pedestrian for the day. My kind of main thing is that I like the idea of Sam Leavitt because he can run as well. He had a 10-yard rushing touchdown in this game. We know Kenny Dillingham can do some real good wonders with dual threat quarterbacks. And he's got Scatabo to spell him in the rushing game, so you don't put the entire weight of the offense on Leavitt's shoulders, so that kind of helps him out a lot. My problem is, like, who is he going to throw to? Because Troy O'Mary's back in a walking boot. Xavier Guillory is coming back. He participated in practice the last couple of weeks, but didn't take any reps in the spring game. Jordan Tyson participated, but to my admittedly untrained eye, he didn't really look 100%. He had a long pass in this game that clearly should have gone for a touchdown, but as you watch him, you could tell he's not full speed, and it was easily caught by the defense there. So, like, I don't know. To me, like, I'm moving up Leavitt into my rankings, right? I got him, I think, at, like, wide quarterback, like 40-something now. Because, again, like, Kenny Dillingham, dual-threat quarterback, I like that. My problem is, like, all right, in order to justify that, which receiver am I going to move into my rankings? That's really the only thing I can really use to justify that. Maybe Jordan Tyson, maybe Xavier Guillory, if they're healthy, I'm interested in. We'll see. I'll probably look at them more during the fall. But I don't know. Okay, am I going crazy, overreacting here, adding Levitt to my rankings?
I don't think you're crazy to add him to your rankings, but in the 40s is crazy, I think. Um, I looked into him a little bit before the show. I was shocked. He ran for like 700 yards in high school. I guess at least maybe in his final year. I was prepared to say, hey, like another great C2C option because he gets some experience, some playing time before potentially playing pro. He's got good size. If he can run a little bit at 6'2", 200, like I love that in Dillingham's offense. But they have like nobody. And
Nobody.
so I'm not willing to put him in the 40s, but like there's no reason not to have him between 55 and 70. Like their schedule is fairly soft. Um, I don't necessarily worry about his like receiver options with the situation with like a potentially non-zero runner at quarterback. I think really Arizona State, I think Levitt being good, the biggest thing about that is Scatabo, his upside, which I think you
Mhm.
want to talk about here about where we have them all ranked. But like Scatabo to me is like the biggest riser out of this spring game with how he potentially performed as well as how Levitt performed and how this is also different, right? Because we talked about everybody was brand new to Jaden Rashada and him going to the portal. I still consider Rashada the starter, and obviously until you hit the portal. So Levitt was always going to be fresh to my rankings. I think Scatabo is the biggest mover here from the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, I think Scatabo is going to be a guy they have to rely on this year, right? Like, there's nobody else really in that running back room right now. I know some of the guys on our recruiting team, like Jason Brown, the true freshman running back they're bringing in there. They got Raleek Brown, but he's more of a weapon and an athlete, really, than a true running back there. Um, Scatabo was able to get RB33 last year. I think that, again, you're going to see him get a bigger workload this year. I think you're going to see him potentially get even a bigger receiving workload than you got last year. Last year had 24 catches. Could we see him get into the 30s with that? I think it's a possibility. So, like, all that tells me is that he's going to outperform his RB33 performance last year. We have him ranked. UK have him as RB40. I got him at RB35, and Nate Marquise also has him at RB35. Are we underestimating him a smidge, you think?
Yeah, I think so. And I actually have just recently adjusted to him to RB27.
Woo! Decent jump.
Yeah, so I think, the guys that I put him over, both Ohio State running backs, Abu Sama, Donovan Edwards, Marcus Carroll, Tootin, Haynes, Buckley, Trey, Chip, I should say, ATM, Connors, Hunt. Like, to me, Scatabo has shown enough. He performed last year, so I'm good with him in the mid to late 20s. The Ohio State guys are tricky. Donovan Edwards is tricky because the system makes so much sense to have a top 25 running back, but I just am not sold on him. I'm just not sold on him. But otherwise, I think Scatabo is in a great spot to be. If he did RB33 last year, why can't he do that again with better quarterback play?
No, I definitely agree with you because again, you go from Bourget to Levin. I think you absolutely can jump up. Let's see if I can justify a similar change in my rankings here because, like, I agree with you. I'd probably move him ahead of Ricky Hunt, Dean Connors, Trevor Etienne, Bayshawn Tutin. Yeah, honestly, I'd move him. Dang, yeah. I start to kind of question myself a little bit when I get to Jalen Buckley, Jonah Coleman at Washington, and Quinshon Judkins at Ohio State. That's kind of the range where I'm like kind of slowing down a little bit. I'm not going to put him ahead of Mario Anderson now that it's pretty clear that Mario Anderson's the RB1 for Memphis. We'll talk about that on another show. But I think yeah, I can put him at RB27. I think I'm going to end up right where you are. So
There's some good running backs that have some pros and cons there.
Yeah.
I have him just behind Jaheim White at RB26. I could see him being way better than RB26. I could see him being RB46. There's just kind of like you pick your flavor, you pick what kind of risk you want to take. It's an interesting debate and an argument, but I like Scatabo at the very least enough to put him in the 20s and feel confident about it now.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to be more aggressive about getting him in best balls because he's currently going as RB38. in best balls right now, and that's right in that range. Again, like 90th pick, that's right in that range where it feels like running back starts to dry up a little bit. And like he to me strikes me as like a perfect guy to grab in that range if like you go wide receiver heavy with your start, right? Grab him in the 7th, 8th round ahead of where he's going. Actually, no, excuse me. Grab him in the like 5th, 6th round ahead of where he's going in like the 7th, 8th round last couple of months. So,
yep.
All right, let's keep moving here. Let's go on over to Colorado. We pretty much already discussed the running back situation here. They had a quarterback playing running back Isaiah Hodge, which he did rip off a 40-yard touchdown in this game. But to me, that just tells me the level of defense that was being played here. Once again, start all of your starters against Colorado's defense this year because Deion does not seem to care about that whatsoever. The O-line play supposedly was better. I know a lot of the beat writers were kind of highlighting the fact that the first team unit only gave up 1 sack. But once again, they're playing against Colorado's defense, so like I don't really think you can read that much into that. I still think this O-line is going to be quite the mess going into the season, which is another reason why I'm down on Shedeur Sanders again this year. But, okay, I somewhat owe you an apology for some of our Slack discussion we had a couple of, maybe a week or two ago, where you were calling me out about how low I had LeJounte Wester ranked. I think I had him in the 90s for wide receivers. And I was telling you, like, I don't know. There's nothing here telling me that he is a guy that will be a playmaker for Colorado this year. Well, he only came out and immediately was like one of the focal points of the offense. 3 catches, 66 yards, and a touchdown. And he only played for the first few drives of the game, which tells me that he's a guy that they're trying to save. Is a guy that they don't want out there getting hurt. So I will admit to you that I was too low on LeJounte Wester and his ability to translate up here to Colorado, but I still think it is warranted to wonder, how does this receiver target share break down between him, Jimmy Horn, Travis Hunter, Will Shepard coming in as well? How do you kind of square all that away? And where do you have LeJounte ranked? I forget.
I like LeJounte. I haven't messed around too much with my rankings recently, so I have him in the 30s. I will be moving him up for sure to like probably the late 20s. There's some really interesting names in there that are really fun to play with and have on the roster. But the biggest concern for me is that like I need to be sold. I need to convince myself that they're going to use just 3 guys. I do believe they're going to do the same thing as last year, which is roll out the same 3 guys for an insane amount of routes run and snaps and targets. But that was with Sean Lewis. It is Sean Lewis, right? The guy that's now at San Diego State. And now we have, I think it's now Pat Shurmur, right? Like, so I need to convince myself that while yes, Shedeur is going to pass a ton because Deion cares that much, I need to know that they're going to use the same consolidated, concentrated receiver group. I do think at the end of the day, give me any and all Colorado receivers late, like, right. It's really between Horn, Wester, Hunter, and
Shepard.
I took Wester in this most recent draft that I was in like an appropriate place, like 9, 10, 11th round. And I took Jimmy Horn at like the 24th round or something like that. Like I will do that every day of the week because I think that there's the very least I'm going to get one great receiver out of that kind of locks it in. But I need to dig in more. You look at, like, I'm looking at RotoWire real quick to see some targets. And it really truly is, even when they were bad with like Shedeur hurt and the offensive line hurt, they still threw to 3 guys. So you're really banking on some health and some offensive line play improving. And I'm in on nabbing the different Colorado receivers, like I kind of discussed in my quarterback stacking article.
So I just moved LeJounte up. I had him in the 90s. I cannot get to where you're at. I cannot put him in the 30s.
90s is wild to even start with,
because I don't have all of them up that high to begin, right? So like Travis Hunter, he's my wide receiver 1 for Colorado this year for a good reason, right? Because Deion freaking loves that kid.
Totally fair, yeah.
He's my wide receiver 48. So like I can't justify putting Wester higher than 48. So I've kind of moved him down from where I kind of felt from there, and I can put him over Crenshaw McKay out of Kent State. I can put him ahead of Camden Benjamin at Tulsa, Easton Messer at Western Kentucky. I can't get him ahead of guys like Amari Thomas and Denzel Boston at Washington. That's kind of how I kind of ended up with him at wide receiver 57. I think, like, given how I feel about the Colorado offense in general, like having Hunter and Wester in the 40s and 50s there makes sense when we have a pretty deep year at wide receiver for the most part.
That's tough, man. I just have a hard time thinking that there's that many guys above. Like, if I can get the idea that, hey, like Travis Hunter, if I have him as a receiver one, that like I can't possibly put him over that. But like the name you said, Krishan McKay, like LaJohntay Wester shouldn't even be in the same stratosphere as Krishan McKay.
Why not? Krishan McKay was on fire last year before he got hurt. He plays in the MAC.
Yeah, but
Colorado's going from the Pac-12 to the Big 12. Like, granted, again, I'm not saying like it's an astronomical difference in defensive talent, but like it is a difference, right? And there was already kind of some problems there with us having consistent week-to-week wide receivers for Colorado last year.
My defense would be Deion's going to throw it a ton, and he grabbed the highest I think he was the highest targeted player in college fantasy football last year.
Second. He was behind
second
Washington.
Highest. Yeah, it's okay. So second highest targeted guy. Like, how does he not hit 100 targets? Like, just feels like an absolute no-brainer, easy, and like to put him in the 60s, still a little criminal for me. So I approve
50s. Give me some credit.
And I appreciate you improving there, but I would still debate that that's still a little low.
But okay, you had like the perfect situation last year, right? Where it's like three guys out there. What did Xavier Weaver finish as wide receiver?
If you were to look at the first 6 games, though, what would it happen, right? Like Sanders was getting pummeled.
Yeah, that was
the
also
line stunk. Like,
that was a perfect storm. The first couple of games for Colorado, we saw how much they fell apart. Who's to say that doesn't happen again this year?
Well, that's why we play the games on the field.
Who's to say that it doesn't start that way? What if they're just terrible all 12 games?
Yeah, it is a give and take. Like I think ultimately, 50 still feels a little bit low for me, but. If you think he's a receiver too, then that's fine. And you said you have Hunter at 48.
47 now. Actually,
47?
I moved one guy down that I saw that I was like, I could probably move him down a little bit. There's probably some other guys like I could see myself getting Hunter into like the low 40s.
Where do you have Horn and Shepard?
Oh, good Lord, I don't. Shepard,
I mean, like ballpark it. You don't need
Shepard. I got 77 because again, the outside position is usually pretty solid. That's where Weaver was at last year, and I don't think I actually have Horn, which is probably a mistake. I should have all 4 of those guys ranked at some point, but like I'm not going to have Horn much higher than I have Shepard, I don't think.
Okay.
Alrighty, enough debating the Colorado situation. I'm a hater. I'm somebody who does something.
Let's talk about something you love talking about.
Washington
State.
I do love talking about Washington State, and I do love talking about anything to do with Ben Arbuckle's offense, and love talking about the fact that I loved what I saw out of John Mateer this past weekend. Again, not the most accurate day, 11 for 24, but 194 yards when he was on. He was on. Touchdowns to tight end Billy Revere, 75-yard touchdown there, who almost had another one later on. Also got a 41-yard touchdown to Mr. Josh Meredith, another guy that I have been drafting pretty much everywhere because he is playing in the slot there for Washington State, along with Chris Hudson. Zevi Eckhouse, the competing quarterback with John Mateer there, also had a pretty nice day. 19 for 30, 196 yards, 2 touchdowns. Started off a little rough, started off 5 for 14, kind of definitely turned it on in the second half there. He had touchdowns to Carlos Hernandez and freshman running back Wayshawn Parker. If you can't tell just by the names I'm listing here, they kind of split up the starting wide receivers here. Hernandez and Hudson were playing with Eckhouse, and then you had Meredith and Kyle Williams playing with John Mateer. Williams actually pretty quiet on the day. I think he had 1 catch for 22 yards. So, but it was good to see. Again, I don't think Mateer necessarily won the job here. Again, I was probably a little, like I sent out a tweet yesterday where I'm like, I think he wins the job today. I was probably a little bit jumping the gun there. I will not lie. But at the same time, like, I really liked what I saw there, and I do think he'll end up winning the job here between him and Eckhouse. The other interesting thing, again, I'm not saying go draft a Ben Arbrook running back, but Juvensky Schlenbaker, the top returning running back from last year, got 16 carries for 106 yards on the ground in this spring game. The Cougars did not have a running back with 16 carries in a single game all of last season. I just kind of find that a little interesting that, like, in all games, a spring game, they have like a guy close to a workhorse role here, because he also had a catch for 3 yards as well. So 17 touches for 109 yards and a touchdown. So maybe that means something. Maybe a name to file away there, but I don't know. Okay. Do you need to put out some fire here with me and my love for the Washington State offense, especially going up against a Mountain West offense or Mountain West schedule, basically?
No. I think you're fine on the love of Washington State's offense as long as you don't target Washington State running backs. There's no way I'm rostering a Washington State running back. I saw last year what they were doing with those guys. It was gross. There's no value in that, in my opinion. He would have to catch like 5 passes a game. He'd have to be like a Mississippi State running back from the Mike Leach days, RIP. This is where things get interesting with college fantasy football, right? Like in these best ball drafts, if you just look at the numbers, Mateer and Eckhouse, they both pretty much played the same, like from stat line purposes, like slightly different, right?
It's very clear that those were the two they wanted out there the most.
For sure. And if you are sold on one of them based on watching it, right, you should go for it. Like, I think this is, after watching it, maybe seeing a little bit of context of like who played with who type of thing. It seemed like Mateer played with the ones, right? Like he played with all the more typical names.
So I'd have to look at the offensive line. That might be a bit more of talking about who, but like I said earlier, they split the receivers for sure, because Carlos Hernandez and Chris Hudson both are starters for Washington State. And they were with
Eckhouse. You had Williams and Revere as a tight end as the starter, and then
Meredith with Mateer. So again, they pretty much split the pass catching options. Again, it seemed like they wanted to give both guys a fighting chance in the spring game.
I think if you like one of them, I think after watching the game, you should pounce on whoever you like. If you're feeling validated and vindicated with what you've seen, because they're going criminally low. They really truly are. Like, pre-spring game, it's like you're just working off of articles, right? Which is hard to do with anything with drafting. If you like one of them, you should do it now, because you're not going to get a better price. And the closer we get to the season, that price is going to continue to go up and up and up.
I have a disgusting, like, irresponsible amount of shares of John Mateer. And I probably should take a couple of shots on Zevi Eckhouse just to be safe, but they are going right next to each other in ADP. Like, Mateer is QB 39, Eckhouse is 42. So, like, they're going really close to each other. So I'm probably going to have to be a bit more strategic about just grabbing them back to back in some of my quarterback rooms there.
Have you handcuffed in every time you've taken Mateer? Or?
Oh, absolutely not. Again, like I said, an irresponsible number of Mateer shares. So if he
maybe you handcuff a little bit here and there. Then
that's what I was saying. Like, I might need to handcuff here and there and be very particular about it. But like, I don't know. Like, I loved Mateer. I think he absolutely fits the system super, super well. And so that's my ride or die this year is John Mateer. Because when I initially made my rankings, I was like, oh, John Mateer is the next guy up at Washington State. I'm going to put him in my top 12. I've come back a little bit from that, but he's still in my 20s. Like, I'm still very, very high on Mateer. All right. And again, just one more disclaimer. I'm not saying go draft Juvensky Schlenbaker. I'm saying, like, it's just interesting to note that, like, they did give him a good amount of volume.
I heard invest top 10 round capital on him, but that's just what I heard. I don't know about anybody else.
Anyway, let's go and talk about the last team we'll talk about here today, Kay. And that is San Jose State. Again, a team we've kind of touched on here and there, but for the most part, like, we haven't gotten a ton of answers. And there still aren't really a ton of answers here, but we are kind of narrowing things down here, right? It's a neck-and-neck competition at quarterback for Walker Eget and Emmett Brown. The or the head coach said post game. However, it does seem like, according to the people who are actually there, that Walker Eget got the majority of the snaps. So is this an offense investing into? Potentially. Again, we saw what Craig Stutzman was able to do at Utah State 2 years ago. Had a pretty solid passing game going on there. The spread and shred, veer and shoot style, or the run and shoot style system. That's a system we love for college fantasy. We saw that, or last year, Stutzman was learning from G.J. Kinney, which can only be a good thing for college fantasy reasons moving forward. So, again, Eget, Brown, they're going for 330, as Austin Nace would say. So, again, a quarterback room, I would say, is worth keeping an eye on. And then the other thing is the running back situation. I do think we need to put a little bit of fire out on Mr. Floyd Chalk IV, a Justin Leo volume pick special. And you guys know me, I respect Justin greatly. And he was the first one to really start talking about Floyd Chalk and this transfer from Grambling State to San Jose State, because of Jackson Moore's article stating that Chalk seemed to be separating himself at the running back position. But according to people who were on the ground on Saturday, this is a quote from the Mountain West Connection here. Quote, at running back, Jabari Bates and Floyd Chalk, a Grambling State transfer, showed a powerful 1-2 punch. Bates' shifty breakaway speed as a small, tough back counters a larger power back in Chalk, though the defense mostly had their number on Saturday. And then a further quote from Mercury News here, quote, with San Jose State losing record-breaking running back Kyrie Robinson to graduation, the Spartans have turned to sophomore Jabari Bates to take over as the team's starting tailback. So, again, obviously we like what Chalk brings with his power back mentality, but I do think it's a little early to take the shots on Chalk in late drafts, thinking that, oh, I'm getting a starting running back here. Now, Jackson Moore, based on his latest depth chart on 247, still maintains that Chalk will be the main back. However, he did not comment on the running back position in his post-spring game write-up, so I don't know if that really tells you anything about what he was able to see there. So, Kay, I'm rambling here. San Jose State, are you investing in this whatsoever, or is it worth the amount of time that I'm putting into trying to understand what this offense is going to look like this year?
Probably not investing anything. Certainly not in the run game. There's some interesting names, but it's just so murky. We don't know who's going to be the one, who's going to be the one that's getting the most carries. Is this offense going to be good? I think, we talk about these quarterbacks, right? Eget, Brown, Butterfield, who we like, Katz, and my buddy Andrew Katz and I considered as the guy is not even being discussed really. It's scary. Is this offense going to be any good? I think this might be a situation where you say, okay, well, maybe a Justin Lockhart, because he has a past history of being valuable. Maybe a Nick Nash is a guy that's potentially valuable to have in drafts. But otherwise, I'm thinking forward. Who is going to be there in 2025? That might be because, as long as they continue to play this Mountain West Conference schedule, it's going to be fairly soft in comparison to others. And I'm interested in, maybe a better offense and who these key pieces would be. And I also want to see, I want to see what this offense looks like. Mm-hmm. Bringing over the Navy head coach to run your offense essentially is not appealing to me, even though I know they're not.
I would say he's not.
They're not, but you've only ran the triple option for 15 years. What could you possibly run year one of not triple option?
Again, that's why he went and got Craig Stutzman.
So I want to see it actually, and I want to actually see it before I start to invest anything legitimate. But for dynasty purposes, I would be thinking future focused, right? 2025 and beyond. Who's going to be here? This Grambling State guy could be interesting because, he could potentially be there another year, right? This Bates guy is smaller, he's younger. Could he be here, right? If 5'8", if you have eligible years, you're not going to the draft. So that's how I would approach it more than the whole redraft 2024 season type production.
No, I gotcha. Here, I'm going to look up to see if.
And by the way, what are the chances that the Grambling State transfer is super productive in the Mountain West? The Mountain West is still a solid it's Mountain West has to be the best G5 conference, right? Or the second best at the very least. So
Second,
like,
American Athletic, I would still put above them.
yeah, I mean, I guess Sun Belt 2 is up there too. So I'm sorry. But like that's not a slouch, right? Like I think that's like a legitimate conference. So like to go Grambling State to Mountain West is still it's an improvement. It's a big step up. So I need to see it before I believe it.
No, I can totally get that. By the way, Floyd Chalk absolutely will stick around after another year. He is only, from what I can tell, he has only used up 2 years of eligibility. So he'll have this year and next year.
So there you go. I mean, I'm future focused here. Justin Lockhart, maybe Nick Nash type. Those are the ones I'm interested in potentially. But I just am not. Stutzman's there, but I'm concerned about what this could actually happen in terms of an offense.
I think it's fair. Again, it's just a fun offense to talk about because again, it feels like it's just kind of flying under the radar, and we look for these every year, right? Where what offenses are kind of flying under the radar. Last year, I would say South Florida and like Byron Brown and them were kind of flying under the radar. I mean, James Madison even a little bit last year. Like where was Jordan McLeod going? Where was Elijah Surratt
all those guys,
Reggie Brown going late?
Yeah, you talked about this with Josh on Jason Natty weeks and weeks and weeks ago about like San Jose State is probably one of those teams that you add a couple players to your watch list, see how they perform, who really is the guy getting targets, who really is the guy getting carries. Like with Rutgers receivers, nobody's paying attention to these guys.
True.
Like at Mountain West, there's gonna be late games. You might get a leg up by watching and observing who's really the key players there. After a week or two, hop on a guy and stash him and see what happens.
I think it's fair. Alrighty, that's pretty much all the time we have for today. Again, plenty of other spring games that we could have talked about. Some guys that I was thinking about talking about UCLA, some Buffalo today, but we do not have time. And the good news for all of you out there is that I will be recording an additional CETN podcast later this week. I know I promised to do that last week. Unfortunately, work just kind of got in the way for me, but we will do a rapid reaction show where I'm just going to burn through a whole bunch of teams that we, again, just either they didn't really have a ton to take away from, or just, again, we didn't really have time to get to on the show. So look forward to that later this week. Definitely you want to listen to it because there are some names I'm going to bring up that are absolutely available everywhere for free that could potentially be some big guys down the road. And I won't have Kay there to put out my fires in terms of be irresponsibly hyping up some of these guys. So definitely check that out later this week. And again, May, we're kind of wide open in terms of topics for CTN. Again, the spring portal will close next week. We might have a few guys trickle in terms of, like I mentioned earlier, guys like Mike Wright, Sam Brown out of Houston. If he lands in Miami, that'll be interesting to talk about. But for the most part, none of those can really carry a whole show by themselves. We have one spring game this next week, and that is Washington. So we're not going to be talking about that anymore. So if you guys have topics that you really want me to touch on, my DMs are open at CFF_Jared on Twitter. You can find me there. I am absolutely open-minded to different topics over the next month, especially since last year this would have been Dynasty Month. But we have a whole Dynasty podcast dedicated to that now, so things have opened up here. Kay, what kind of stuff do you got coming out and everything? I know you said you got about a month left of maternity.
A week left. I wish I had a month left. Yeah,
a week left of maternity leave. You got anything in the oven ready to go for people?
I've been doing some best ball stuff, and we've done a Campus to Canton best ball draft, basically in March, and again here in April. Just kind of do something comparing the two, and like maybe some trends and things that like explaining why things are happening, but then also maybe a late, like I said at the beginning, like a late quarterback draft strategy. How, if you're going to do it, how should you do it? And maybe talking about the validity of it, like is it really all that feasible? So a couple different random things that'll pop up here and there for sure.
No, and again, those would be great contents. Again, if you guys haven't checked out Kay's previous written work, go check it out on campusagain.com. You can search by author. He has some great stuff. One thing that I just was reminded of, again, we got the Devi guide coming out for Campus to Canton. I talked about the CFF guide. We are releasing another one this year. Party noises, little streamers and stuff like that. Yay. Be on the lookout for the @ChasingTheNatty Twitter account. I'm going to be posting a survey for all of you guys listening out there. Again, we have put out great content with the CFF guide the last couple of years, but pretty much, I would say, whenever I directly reach out to all of you guys always provide some great feedback on how we can be better moving forward, what you would like to see, and I do try to incorporate those things as best I can. So we're going to do that with the CFF guide again this year, so be on the lookout for that survey moving forward later this week. And with that, I think we can say that we have made it to the end of our show. I want to appreciate and thank all of you guys for listening. If you have not already, go ahead and leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you're watching this on the YouTube side of things. If you're on the podcast, follow the show and leave the 5-star reviews wherever you can. Make sure you guys check out the rest of the Campus to Canton Podcast Network for shows ranging on pretty much anything you can think of related to the college fantasy game. Make sure you check out Bernie the Redshirt K's show with Andrew Katz as well. We'll see you guys back here next Monday where, like I said, topics are open. We'll see what kind of crazy stuff we can come up with for next week. Until then, I really appreciate you guys and hope you have a wonderful and blessed week. See y'all.